Where is it that you belong? What have those places become since you first asked yourself such a question? Is there but one ultimate destination, the memory or imaginations of which frame the experience of all other places? Does it exist as a locale or something altogether liminal, like that same sort of feeling when you started walking somewhere at sunrise, because watching a clock count the hours of your unrest was lacking in romance or epiphany? And you ended up in this cemetery, scaled the fence as the first rays of light wove themselves into its metal links. And the graveyard was hilly like the home you always knew. Wherever that was, it was decidedly somewhere different, somewhere else. So the light hitting the fence didn't reach all the corners of the landscape, and you wandered through the lines of grave markers, treating them as though they were abandoned trenches, and yourself some forgotten prisoner of war, masking your figure in the fading pockets of blue-black darkness, from an enemy whose face you'd never quite remembered, whose existence you'd never quite been able to convince yourself of. And you just kept walking as it got lighter and lighter, and the shadows turned from their impenetrable indigo into a lightened lilac, warmed up by the oscillations of oranges and yellows, creeping up or down the towering monuments, and you looked closely at the stone of the pillars, trying to decide which direction that light was traveling. And after some thought, you concluded that it must start from above and work its way down, for why else would the powerful and important demand such markers for their graves, if not to spend an eternity calling dibs on the simplicity and purity of the early morning light? And you wondered how it would feel to the dead beneath your feet, if you leveled the ground above them and erased this advantage, so the bodies buried beneath the forgotten markers, in turn buried beneath the unkempt grass, could have a chance in their afterlife to know the subtle joys of this sensation. And since it was summertime, you started to contemplate the changing of the seasons, and if the dozens of stuffed teddy bears that you kept tally of, their synthetic fur soaked and matted from the recent heavy rains, would dry out before the winter came and took back the extra hours of sunlight it had let the summer borrow. And you wondered about those loved ones still alive, imagined them wandering the brightly lit and tiled floors of the local Walmart, much like you were then pacing the rows of buried bodies, watched them one by one examine the various stuffed bears lining the shelves of the children's aisle, assessing the plastic eyes of each manufactured approximation for that one whose gaze conveyed just the right mixture of optimism and resilience, whose seams and stitching might come closest to composing the ever-vigilant and devoted character in your fictionalized narrative. That one who waits patiently at the foot of this grave, or that one, paying no mind to the passing summer storms, but only to perfecting their protective posture, to uphold their pressing responsibility to represent the undying love and affection that the living spend the remainders of their respective lives trying to figure out how to communicate to their own departed. And while you began to lose yourself in these musings, you started to notice that the dewdrops were glinting one last time before the morning sun dried them up. But what's more is that the fractures they made in all that quickly transforming light caught your eye's gaze and led it to rest on one particular grave in the distance, whose details you couldn't quite make out, but it didn't seem to matter since you were already moving towards it, your pace even quickened slightly to a canter of compulsion. And when you finally arrived, suddenly you were overtaken by what you saw there, such that you simply dropped to your knees and let your breath bear the weight that your body now felt so acutely. And being overcome with the exhaustion whose stubborn absence had led you on this journey to begin with, you allowed yourself a few quiet tears and let your heavy eyelids open and close at their own will for a while. And in this pause, you attempted to understand what was taking place within you as a result of this scene to which you were bearing witness. A pair of bare feet, carved from a porous stone, severed from the legs by a clean cut just above the ankles, rested on a podium that rose a foot or two above the ground. A pair of women, also carved from this very same stone, brought to their knees by this very same sight holding you captive, only their paralysis was permanent, and yours just an imitation of their immortalized grief. One of the women looked down at the severed feet, her head cocked to the side and pressed into the chest of her intact companion, and you thought that before the stone around her mouth was chipped away by the passing of time, that it must have hung open in some sort of tormented anguish, of mourning for the bodies once tethered to where these feet were now anchored, and with her hands fixed to her chest, where her heart would have resided were she not carved from that rock, you could feel her sadness seep into you, and how it paused there, among the gaps of your rib cage, before it crashed into your lungs, making you aware of the stinging of your breath, the depth of your ingratitudes, and the expanse of your transgressions. And in this moment, all you could do was to let yourself weep. And so you did, alone and yet surrounded by all that you've been questioning, every doubt unveiled by the sun's final ascent above the tree line, by the anonymous men driving their pickups through the footpaths to begin their daily routine of tending to these graves, not one of them noticing that you were there, glimpsing your salvation and muttering beneath your breath to that broken-hearted woman carved out of stone, "Thank you, thank you, thank you."